Good afternoon. My name is Brian Mink. I'm the General Counsel and Vice President of Risk Management at InTown Suites and Uptown Suites, which is a large national extended stay hotel chain based in Atlanta, Georgia. And I'm also an adjunct professor of legal analytics and innovation at the University of Georgia School of Law. Today I'm going to be talking about building the plane while flying it, driving data innovation without pumping the brakes. So first, I'll spend a few minutes talking about my own data innovation journey, which is a lot different than a lot of folks that find themselves in data science. Then I'll talk about identifying innovation opportunities. We'll move on to building your innovation toolkit once you identify those opportunities within your organization to take on innovative and data-driven projects. How do you build the tools that you need in order to take on that project? And finally, we'll talk about how you overcome barriers to innovation once you've identified these opportunities and you've started taking on these projects. Once you hit those roadblocks, what do you do? So first, my own data innovation journey. I am the Chief Legal Officer, General Counsel at InTown Suites and Uptown Suites, which means I'm responsible for all of our legal and risk management matters across all of our 196 hotels in 22 states and 1,500 employees. So I really come at this from the perspective of an executive and how, as an executive, can we leverage data to make better decisions on the legal and risk management side. And that's really where my experience lies. Prior to coming to InTown and Uptown Suites, I worked in large law firms as well as large in-house law departments and had experience leveraging data to enhance our legal and risk management decisions in those contexts. And I think what's significant about that and how it's framed my perspective is that I often have had to work with people who don't speak the language of data, particularly lawyers, who sometimes don't really understand a lot of the technical aspects around data. They may not understand at all how to leverage data in decision making, and oftentimes they can even be threatened by the use of data. And I also have a lot of experience taking unstructured, unleveraged data in legal and risk management context and turning that into structured data that can be leveraged. So as attorneys, we are often dealing with contracts and briefs and motions and memos and things that don't necessarily lend themselves to a structured format very easily. So it can be a challenge of how do we take all of this really valuable data that's living in an unstructured format in these Word documents and PDFs, and either figure out a way to leverage that unstructured data in its current state or to transform it into structured data that we can then leverage and generate value for our organizations, our clients. And I've also had to work with a lot of cross-functional teams. So I've had the legal expertise, obviously being an attorney, but I've only had pieces of kind of the analytics expertise and technical piece. And often, even the expertise that I had, it really didn't make sense as a practicing attorney for me to go out and be building things on my own when there could be people within our organization or vendors that could assist me in building a lot of the solutions that I was proposing to build within law firms and large in-house law departments. So it can be very important to think about how you can work with cross-functional teams to bring in that different expertise so that you're really tapping into all the resources that are available to you and you're not trying to do it all by yourself. So I've always had to build the plane while flying it. It really hasn't been an option. As throughout every innovative data-driven project that I've ever tackled across multiple organizations, I have simultaneously been a practicing attorney and had a significant day job as a practicing attorney. And so you have to make time for these strategic initiatives if you're going to drive your organization forward, but you also have to get your day job done, and you have to continue to bring value to the organization in kind of more traditional ways. And that's something to think about. And anytime you're taking on one of these innovative projects is, how do I keep doing the things that I'm doing really well, but also help drive our organization forward? How do I build the plane while I'm flying it? So number two, we're going to talk about how you identify opportunities for innovation within your organization. I would encourage you to start with your own problems first. So it can be very tempting to go out and think about all the different things that your organization could do better, all the different things that your team could do better, and you have a million ideas and it becomes overwhelming, and maybe you don't have the depth of knowledge with all of those different ideas to really execute them effectively. But if you start with your own problems first, start with your own day-to-day pain points, that can be a very effective way of immediately moving the needle. So this is what I did when I was at an outside counsel law firm. Was I was drafting a lot of contracts at the time, and it was driving me crazy how repetitive and rote this process was. And I thought there's got to be a better way. There has to be a way to automate this process. We're doing the same thing over and over and over again. And by the way, we're not capturing any of this data in a structured format. I'm typing it in this 50-page Word document, and then that's where it's living, and no one is extracting this data. We're not leveraging this data across multiple contracts to see what we're putting in these contracts. This isn't integrating with our clients' business systems that are data-driven. So we've got to figure out a way to do this better, and this is a pain point that I want to solve in my practice and for my clients. So we automated those documents, and what that allowed us to do is take that unstructured data that was in those contracts and transform it into structured data that we could use to generate value for our clients' organizations. So that's the important thing to remember always, is structured data much, much easier to leverage than unstructured data. And so when you can transform that unstructured data into structured data, you immediately have created a ton of value by creating something that can now be easily leveraged in the form, like here, of user-friendly dashboards that we provided to our clients, showing them what their legal rights and obligations were in their various contracts. Building to the next innovation, we were able to take that same data and leverage it to optimize our clients' negotiation strategies, to show them, here's what you're negotiating in your contracts across all of these different states, across all of these different types of transactions, and we can use that to inform our negotiations with other parties as to how we're going to negotiate these contracts moving forward, and we can actually see how we are tracking with the various goals that we have. Are we successfully negotiating the contract language that we are trying to negotiate? So in your organization, think about what your biggest pain points are. What are the people, the processes, and the technologies that you think are causing backlogs, that you think are creating inefficiencies, where there are missed opportunities to generate value from data? Think about what those pain points are and start to tackle those first, and that's where you'll find your exciting data-driven innovative initiatives. So how do you build your innovation toolkit? Once you've identified, here's the thing that I want to do within the organization, how do I actually do that? How do I actually accomplish it? And this is a very important slide. Successful data strategies are multifaceted. And what I mean by that, often data scientists, because you're so skilled in the analytics piece of this, that's right where you want to jump, right? So you think, oh, look at all this data we have, look at all the exciting things that we can do with that data, and sort of all the theoretical applications that would be valuable to our organization. But if these other things aren't aligned with that, then you're not going to get anywhere, and anything that you want to do is ultimately not going to generate the value that it needs to generate for the organization, because all of this other stuff is not aligned. So fundamentally, the two things at the core are the most important. Your people and your processes have to be aligned in such a way that is going to allow you to be data-driven, that's going to allow you as an organization to innovate. And so you have to think about, how are we going to get the people and the processes aligned around what we're trying to do? And then you have to think about, where are we collecting this data from? What data do we have? Is that quality data? If it's a lot of data, how are we governing that data? Who has access to it? What are the policies surrounding it? What are the legal requirements that we have to think about? What are the silos within our organization that we have to overcome? Do we have adequate infrastructure to process all of this data, to do what we need to do with it? And then you can think about the analytics, right? All these exciting things that we could ultimately, the insights we can ultimately generate from this data. But then to make those analytics valuable to your business, to actually have an impact on the bottom line, you also have to have buy-in from the folks who are going to be making decisions based on that information. So the decision-making aspect of this is that other piece that wraps around all of this that makes it valuable. Once you take those analytics and then ultimately use them to make better decisions, that's how you generate value. And then taking it one step further, Once your organization is a data-driven organization and you have a data culture and you have a culture that allows data to lead decision making, that's how you can be agile as an organization, how you can respond effectively to black swan events like COVID-19, how you can respond to supply chain challenges, to other challenges and opportunities that may unexpectedly present themselves. How do you forecast the impact of those? How do you determine how that's going to ripple across all the different aspects of your business, including the legal and risk management functions? You can only do that effectively if you've got all these other things in place and you have a culture that embraces data and that is data driven. So what do you need to implement your innovative data initiatives? First of all, data, of course, that's a fundamental piece, but then also talent, skills, and budget. And we'll take those one by one. So when you're talking about your data, think first, what data do I have, right? It's a lot easier to take the data that you have first than to go out and collect new data. So what data do I have that I could leverage in this initiative? Then what data do I need? And when I say what data do I need, that's not just what new data do we need to collect. It's also what data do we need to clean up? What data is not of good quality that we need to make sure is of better quality before we can leverage it effectively? What data might be siloed in other parts of the organization that we don't have access to, that we need to get access to in order to leverage this? What data might be in different platforms where we got to figure out a way to get it from one platform to another before we can effectively leverage it for the purpose that we're talking about leveraging it for? What permissions do we need? It can be a host of things here. What data do I need? But what data does your team need in order to execute this project that you're working on? What will it take to get that data? Is it an issue of bureaucracy? Is it an issue of cost? Are we going to have to make operational changes? Are we going to have to buy new software? What is it going to take in order to get that data and make sure that we are accounting for that cost when we're thinking about this initiative and we're setting out on it, and we're not halfway through trying to do what we're trying to do and we realize we don't have the data we need, and it's going to take moving heaven and earth in order to get it. You don't want to get to that point. So you need to plan ahead for these things. Okay, so then let's talk about skills, right? You're going to need skills, obviously, in order to execute any type of innovative initiative. And rather than thinking big about all the skills that you might need, start with the skills that you already have. What are your biggest skills? Are you highly technical? Are you very skilled in certain platforms, in certain languages? Like what are your skills? Are you persuasive? Are you able to make a good business case? Are you a good team builder? Are you a good leader? What are the things that make you valuable to this process? And then think about, well, what skills do I need? And those can be skills that you personally need to develop, things that you don't know that you need to know. And coming to a conference like this is a great way to acquire some of those skills. But it can also be skills that are needed on your team in order to accomplish this project that you may not have the bandwidth or desire to go get. And so you might need to find someone to bring onto the team who's going to have those skills. So you're taking an inventory before you dive in. What skills am I going to need? Look at what other industries are doing. So when I was at a law firm, there weren't that many other law firms who were doing a lot of document automation. And so there was a pretty limited sample size when I was doing market research and trying to figure out how to go about doing this. Pretty limited sample size looking at just law firms of how to go about effectively automating a process and collecting data from it. But I said, well, you know who has been doing this for a really long time is heavy manufacturing. So I went and actually got Lean Six Sigma certified, because that's a process, a methodology that's been used for decades in heavy manufacturing to automate processes and collect data. And so that was one really valuable thing that allowed me to better understand how to automate processes, collect data within a law firm, is taking those best practices from other industries and talking to engineers from factories about how they do that with highly complex processes. It actually made automating a contract seem really easy. It's a lot easier than trying to automate the process of building a car, right? So at that point, I thought, well, this will be a snap compared to what these engineers are doing. So think about what other industries are doing and how you might learn from that and be able to innovate yourself as a result of those learnings. And then who do I need on my team? I mentioned figuring out the skills that you don't have that you need to acquire. Develop that cross-functional team. Get people who are skilled in the areas that you're not skilled in. If you're not the person who's going to make a business case, get somebody who knows how to make a business case. Get somebody who's a good leader. If you're not a technical person, get a technical person. If you're technical in one area, but you're not technical in another, fill that void and get somebody who's technical in that other area. Really important in any kind of innovative initiative that you put together the right skills and the right team, or else it's not going to be successful. So I mentioned business case. How do you make a business case? To me, a business case ultimately boils down to these three things. When you're going in and you're asking your organization for time or resources or money, you got to be able to show at least one of these three things, if not all three. So number one, cost savings. How are you going to save the organization money through this initiative? Number two, revenue generation. How are you going to make the organization more money as a result of what you're trying to do? And number three, organizational agility. Right? Maybe this isn't something that's going to immediately save us money or that's going to immediately generate new revenue, but might be something that is going to make us more agile in the face of future events. So this is something that makes us more data-driven, makes us able to better adapt and respond to market conditions. If there are unexpected challenges like to supply chain or disruptions to our business through COVID-19, maybe being data-driven in this way makes us more agile in the face of those so that we can preserve the business that we've built, and that ultimately leads to cost savings and revenue generation because we're, as a business, we are more agile and able to adapt to those conditions. But you have to be able to explain this to executives as part of getting any kind of resources for what you're trying to do. It's not enough to just say, obviously, this is a good idea or it's going to make something more efficient, but really drilling down on quantitatively, how is this going to save us money, or make us more agile? And finally, overcoming barriers to innovation. So anytime you come in an organization, you try to do something new and innovative, you're going to ultimately run into some barriers. And initially, you might even be welcomed with open arms as, oh, this is a great idea, you're taking such a great initiative. But at some point, when you're asking for money, when you're asking for resources, when you're asking for time, someone is going to say, wait a minute, are we sure we want to do this? Are we sure it's worth it? And these are what I call the 3 Bs, and they're the biggest killers to any innovative initiative: budget, bureaucracy, and backbone. So budget, obviously, you'll often be told, oh, we don't have the money for that this year, try again next year, or maybe can you slim this down a little bit? This is not something that we as an organization have the budget to take on at this time. But ultimately, I think budget is really just an excuse for these other two things, bureaucracy and backbone. Because an organization of any significant size, they do have the budget. They do have the money. If they really want to devote the resources to something, they have the money to make it happen. It's not a question of not having the money. It's a question of not wanting to devote the money to this particular initiative. And that becomes a question of bureaucracy and backbone. What are the approvals that you need to get? And do you have the backbone to press forward and get those approvals, to press forward and make the case that this is worth it, that this is something the organization can't afford not to do? And sometimes it requires not just you having backbone, but you finding someone above you who has the same backbone, who is willing to go to bat for this initiative as well. So you have to identify those barriers and figure out how you're going to overcome that bureaucracy by having backbone and making an effective business case. And this is one way that you can do that effectively, is by implementing innovation in a way that generates quick wins, immediate ROI, and builds to the next innovation. And what I mean by this is start with your minimum viable product, the MVP. Instead of getting carried away and thinking about all of the potential of the initiative that you're trying to take on and how it's going to save the organization millions of dollars or make the organization millions of additional dollars or transform the way we do this or that, right? You can have that in the back of your mind, and you can certainly pitch that if it's effective within your organization to pitch that kind of transformational change. But when it comes down to it, if people are sinking significant time, resources, or money into this, they're going to need to see some quick wins to validate that buy-in. They're going to need to see some immediate ROI. This is not something that pays for itself in 10 years. We're going to start seeing immediate results from this very quickly after we implement it. But then also setting yourself up to build to the next innovation, right? We can start small. We can start with an MVP, a little bite-sized project, but then we want to see that grow, and we want to see our vision ultimately realized with this innovation initiative. So starting with that first thing, generating some wins, getting some ROI, and then figuring out how you're going to take that and build to the next. So like I mentioned earlier with contract automation, that's where I started, was automating contracts. Then we took that data and built dashboards. And then we built more complex dashboards that leveraged analytics and helped us optimize our negotiation strategies. But it was one thing at a time. It wasn't all at once. We were generating value each step of the way and building to the next innovation each step of the way. So your barriers to innovation are going to be these big things: budget, which we already talked about, but also processes and culture. So think about, once we execute this, once we develop this great new innovation and we think it's going to generate all this ROI, we have to make sure that people are actually willing to do this, that people are actually going to engage in the automated process, that they're actually going to use the software we're providing, that they're actually going to take the data that we're leveraging and use it to make better decisions. And if you don't have that culture, or if it doesn't align with the processes, if it makes people's jobs a lot harder because it creates some kind of complicated process for them, they're not going to do it and it's going to fail. So you have to think about this stuff in advance of how are we going to actually, once we build something out, how are we going to roll it out in a way that aligns with our processes and that has buy-in from our culture? And then also, how do we make the bandwidth for this? So with any innovative initiative, you have to have the bandwidth to be strategic. You have to have the bandwidth to focus on it, to actually complete it, because in most people's jobs, they aren't paid to just be strategic all the time and to just do cool, innovative projects. Most people have a day job that also requires them to do other things, and lots of tactical things along the way that are, in many cases, not always as exciting as the strategic, innovative initiatives that you're doing, but in many cases critical to the operation of the business. And so you have to be able to make time for these strategic initiatives while also continuing to do your functions that are critical to the operation of the business, and making sure that you have that bandwidth at the outset in order to do this effectively. And if you don't have that bandwidth, either you need to add people to your team and get more resources, or maybe you need to scale back and start with a smaller MVP. But you've got to solve that problem of bandwidth anytime you're doing something that's bold and strategic. So that's all I've got. It's been a pleasure today, and good luck to you all. I really encourage you, when you're taking on any innovative project, to have the courage to do it. It's worth doing it, trying to drive your organization forward, but understand how to do it, building the plane while flying, so that you can drive this innovation without pumping the brakes as an organization. Thank you.